Chapter 16. It's a racial trait. The Baron was utterly defeated. Elizabeth's sharp wit and the twins' cheeky remarks left him grasping for control. Though he wanted nothing more than to see at least one of his daughters married off, forcing the matter would only backfire. In hindsight, Elizabeth's suggestion wasn't entirely unreasonable. Rather than pouring resources into debuting her in the capital's cutthroat social scene, it might be wiser to find a skilled knight nearby and bring him into the family as a consort. As he began to entertain this alternative, the atmosphere shifted. There was tension brewing, and the Baron couldn't shake the unease that had begun to gnaw at him. Turning to Michael, he asked, "When will you be moving to the castle?" 2 or 3 days should be enough to prepare, Michael replied with a calm confidence. At least his last remaining son was cooperative, even if the Baron knew that cooperation had come at a steep financial cost. Once the Baron and his family returned to the castle, Clara eagerly helped Michael pack. Knowing she and Henry would be accompanying him, her excitement was palpable. She hummed a light tune as she folded clothes and organized belongings, her joy infectious. Michael couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. This time, returning to the castle would be different. No longer an outsider, Michael was the heir, and the family's investment in securing his goodwill extended to those he cared about. The morning's funeral and Alfred's cryptic words echoed in his mind. "I'll ensure you claim everything that's rightfully yours." Moving into the castle with his aunt and uncle was the first step in realizing that promise. Once packing was done, Michael grabbed his sword and bowed to head outside. Strength and skill were paramount, especially now. In a land rife with territorial disputes and tribal skirmishes, an heir who couldn't defend his claim would be devoured. Determined to excel, Michael practiced until his muscles ached and his breath came in gasps. The effort left him proud, the satisfaction of improvement radiating through him. As he returned to the house, he was greeted by an unexpected sight. Clara playing with a kitten in the living room. The tiny black cat, adorned with a red ribbon, batted at its own tail with playful enthusiasm. "Where'd the cat come from?" Michael asked, intrigued. "I found her while hanging laundry. She wobbled over to me. Poor thing, so I gave her some milk. She was so hungry. I think she's just a kitten and might have lost her mother. Isn't she adorable? I thought we could keep her." The kitten, as if understanding the conversation, tilted her head and let out a soft meow. "Meow?" Michael laughed. "She's a cute one, all right. Can I hold her?" Clara handed over the kitten, who fit snugly in Michael's hands. Her fur was impossibly soft, like silk, and her weight felt oddly substantial for such a small creature. "She's so light," Michael said, stroking her gently as she stretched lazily in his arms. "Have you named her yet?" "Not yet. Would you like to? How about Niang Niang? She meows so much, it seems fitting." "Ow." The kitten, as if offended, extended her claws and scrambled up Michael's shoulder. "She likes it," Michael declared, laughing as the kitten perched and purred. "Look, she's wagging her tail. That means she's happy, right?" Clara hesitated. I've heard cats wag their tails when they're annoyed." Michael shrugged. "She's just playful. Aren't you, Niang Niang?" Despite her doubts, Clara didn't press the issue. If Niang Niang brought Michael joy, that was enough. To her surprise, Alfred welcomed the kitten as well. He even instructed them to feed her meat and fresh milk daily. Niang Niang quickly made herself at home, following Michael wherever he went. At night, she curled up at his feet, her warmth a comforting presence. While Michael slept, Niang Niang slipped out to find Alfred. Her emerald eyes glinted in the moonlight as she confronted him. "You heard him," she hissed. Alfred, calm as ever, merely raised an eyebrow. "Heard what?" "My name. He dared to call me Niang Niang." Alfred's lips twitched, but he suppressed his laughter. "It's a charming name." "Charming? It's humiliating. Tell him my real name or I'm leaving." Alfred's expression hardened. "You signed a contract, Sphinx. Or have you forgotten the meat, milk, and gold you've received?" The kitten, bristling with indignation, hissed again. "It's Nefertari Hatshepsut, Sphinx, not Niang Niang. Do you understand how degrading this is? And yet here you are meowing. It suits you." Her hissing turned into a full-blown snarl. "That's a racial trait, not my choice." Alfred's rare chuckle echoed in the quiet forest. As the moon hung high, Michael slept soundly, blissfully unaware of the drama surrounding his new companion. The next day, Michael entered the castle with a black cat perched haughtily on his shoulder. Attempts to remove the feline were futile. as it bared its claws and growled threateningly whenever disturbed. Clara and Henry accompanied him. They had agreed to use the castle's basement for their work when necessary. Since the previous executioners had also conducted their tasks within the castle, no special preparations were required. Arriving at the castle in their carriage, they were greeted by the butler and head maid, who guided them to their respective rooms. Michael's accommodations were better than during his previous visits. Located on the 3rd floor, his room overlooked the training grounds and had multiple windows, making it both spacious and well-ventilated. After inspecting Clara's and Henry's quarters and finding them satisfactory, Michael nodded with approval. It was clear that the treatment they received had noticeably improved. Sometime later, the butler escorted Michael to the Baron's office. The Baron stood with his hands clasped behind his back, gazing out the window. "You've arrived just in time. But what's with the cat?" he asked. Michael explained the situation, prompting the Baron to add, "Well, keeping a pet is fine, but don't let it interfere with your training. Now that you're fully immersed in the noble world, there are some things you must keep in mind. The political situation within and around our castle is very complicated. You're aware that our territory, along with 5 others, recently separated from the Earl of Berkeley, aren't you?" Chapter 17. The answer ends with "Ack." Our castle is part of the northeastern region. The court count responsible for this area is from the Woodlock family, and Count Woodlock is a loyal servant of His Majesty the King. However, there's little need to concern yourself with him. He holds only an honorary title and resides in the northeastern palace without actual dominion. The true power in the region is Count Charles. He's as ambitious as he is capable, so be cautious around him. Sigh. If only I had more time to properly train you as my successor. Michael, puzzled by the Baron's lament about insufficient time for successor training, soon learned the reason. A critical report arrived yesterday. A group of deranged cultists has settled on the outskirts of Crowley Barony and massacred 2 villages in succession. Baron Crowley sought aid from both Count Woodlock and Count Charles, and all 5 neighboring territories have been ordered to join the subjugation effort. As the heir of this domain and a knight, you must accompany me in this expedition. Among the cultists are necromancers, so they won't be easy foes. Michael remained unshaken, having anticipated such developments. In this era, there was even a saying, "Wars grow like barley sprouts," highlighting their frequency. Wars were as common as the barley harvest, be it between kingdoms, empires, or noble factions vying for territory. Although this was a subjugation rather than a war, the gathering of northeastern nobles ensured inevitable conflicts. Without the fantastical elements like magic and aura, Michael might have doubted whether he had been reborn in a medieval era. Except for the foreign Pamir Empire, a federation of tribes, the Rubel continent resembled medieval Europe to a fault. "When will we set out?" Michael inquired. "We'll depart at dawn in a week and head to the Kensington Barony, where we'll join the other reinforcements. There's no need to go early and become fodder for arrows. Prepare accordingly. The butler will provide you with the promised items. Also, select a couple of squires. They're all direct descendants of our vassals and will be of great assistance." It was a wise decision. There was no need to take unnecessary risks by leading the vanguard. After receiving growth-enhancing elixirs and armor from the butler, Michael headed to the stables. There, a black horse with a massive, imposing frame stood alone, snorting aggressively in one corner. The stable master cleared his throat. "That one, sir, has got quite the temper. I'm not sure you can tame it within a week. If not, you'll have to ride another horse." Michael locked eyes with the spirited animal as the cat on his shoulder tensed. Climbing onto the horse, he immediately felt the power of its rippling muscles. It was a fine horse. Although it resisted briefly, Michael exerted firm pressure with his thighs, and the animal quickly submitted. After circling the training grounds a few times, Michael glanced at the stable master, who stood gaping at the sight. "It's completely tame. Was it handled incorrectly?" Michael questioned. The horse lowered itself to assist Michael's dismount and followed his commands effortlessly, never requiring a whip. What part of this horse had a bad temperament? "Well, it seems it recognizes its master," the stable master stammered. Everyone else who tried to ride it got thrown off immediately. Though the stable master had spent 50 years around horses, he was at a loss for words at Michael's seamless bond with the animal. "So, what's its name?" the stable master asked. "I can have it engraved on the saddle." After a moment's thought, Michael replied, "Bucephalus." The name matched that of the famous horse of a legendary conqueror from a past life. The stable master, Paul, nodded approvingly, finding the name fitting. After riding Bucephalus a few more laps around the training grounds, Michael dismounted, feeling refreshed. Nothing beat exercise for lifting one's spirits. At a well by the training grounds, Michael splashed his face with cold water when Sir Ronald approached, leading a group of a dozen children. The youngsters, visibly tense, stood in silence. A knight required at least 2 squires to assist with tasks such as donning and removing armor, calming and grooming horses after battle, and maintaining weapons. These children, selected from the kin of vassals, were undoubtedly talented. As squires, they would have a high chance of becoming knights themselves, learning swordsmanship and gaining experience under their knight's guidance. On the battlefield, trust in one's retainers was paramount. A squire was expected to protect their knight, even at the cost of their own life. There was a reason that direct descendants or close relatives of loyal vassals were traditionally chosen as squires. The boys standing before Michael ranged from 12 to 15 years old. They were noticeably taller and sturdier than the average commoners, likely due to better upbringing and nourishment. Contemplating how to select his squires, Michael decided on an elimination method. He first made the boys run laps around the training grounds while wearing sandbags to assess their basic stamina. From there, he chose 6 boys with the best endurance and held a tournament to finalize the selection. The boys ran with fierce determination. Watching their desperate efforts, Michael felt a twinge of sympathy. Bringing children this young to the battlefield was far from ideal. Naturally, the older boys had an advantage when it came to stamina, but Michael was determined not to take excessively young squires to war. In this harsh, survival of the fittest world, risk was inevitable for those seeking to rise. The boys understood this and threw themselves into the competition as if their lives depended on it. For many, this was a chance to elevate their families and secure even a small parcel of land. Eventually, 6 boys returned to the starting line while the rest collapsed onto the ground, swallowing their tears. The tournament began with wooden swords and ended quickly. Michael named Alex, the winner, and Antony, the runner-up, as his squires. Together, they accompanied him to observe the soldiers' training. What Michael saw left him stunned. The soldiers' skills were abysmal, worse than he had imagined. Their basic drills were chaotic, and their clumsy handling of spears, with their backsides sticking out awkwardly, was laughable. Chapter 18. To Michael, who had lived as a modern military officer, the current training methods were crude and haphazard. There was no structure, no professionalism. Skills like swordsmanship, spear techniques, and shield usage were passed down exclusively among nobles, resulting in soldiers being little more than disposable meat shields on the battlefield. They served as barriers to buy time for knights to charge. This would not do. Michael needed well-trained soldiers. He wondered if the low standard was unique to his family's troops, or if it reflected the era's overall military capabilities. Seeking answers, he headed to a library tucked away in a corner of the castle. The so-called library was pitifully small, with few books, suggesting a lack of interest in learning among his ancestors. The collection consisted solely of military-related volumes. Michael picked up Introduction to Military Science and began reading. As he suspected, the book's slim size reflected the near absence of proper training methods or tactics in this era. This had to change. As a former Air Force officer and fighter pilot, Michael felt it was his duty to resolve the situation. Did you all skip breakfast? Why are your responses so weak? Sweating now is better than bleeding on the battlefield. You there, 4th from the left in the 2nd row. Yes, you. Can't you perform the drill properly? It was winter, yet Michael's back was drenched in sweat as he barked orders. Jonathan, the 2nd son of a baker who had defied his mother's protests to become a soldier, began to regret his decision with every fiber of his being. Just 3 days ago, it had seemed like a cushy job, 3 square meals a day and minimal effort, swinging a spear a few times at dawn and dusk. Now, the situation was sheer torture. Jumping jacks, squatting runs around the training grounds, and synchronized sit-stand drills were just the beginning. The demon, leading the training, seemed unfazed by the sight of exhausted soldiers collapsing in pain. All responses end with "Ack." Understood. Soldiers. Michael commanded. "Ack," they shouted. "Yes," some replied hesitantly. "I said it ends with "Ack." Anyone who replied with "yes," step forward. Jonathan's heart sank as tears blurred his vision. Trembling, he stepped forward, spotting his neighbor Hans in the same predicament. At least he wasn't alone. Punished with yet another grueling lap, Jonathan, drenched in sweat and possibly tears, grabbed Hans's arm to pull him back. "Sorry, my friend," he muttered under his breath. "I have to survive." The training was relentless. Even Michael Squires, 5 years younger but physically larger, were merciless in their role of disciplining the soldiers. Jonathan began to understand why all responses had to end with "ack." It came naturally under such duress. Michael observed the scene with satisfaction. In just 3 days, these ragtag troops had started to form ranks and follow orders with some semblance of discipline. The soldiers' standardized supplies were another accomplishment. Remembering the chaotic assortment of belongings they had initially brought, some even lugging thick winter blankets, still made his head spin. Under Michael's system, each soldier was issued 1 blanket, 1 towel, for cloths, a spoon, a fork, a canteen, 3 changes of underwear, and thermal shirts. Additional items, like multi-layered quilted combat vests, thick cloaks that doubled as ground sheets, and waterproofed paper, were provided to ensure preparedness. With help from the castle's mage, Sergei, Michael had also designed backpacks. Once packed with the issued supplies, the soldiers' gear began to resemble proper military kits. Watching his son drill the troops, the Baron felt a swell of pride. Truly, this was his child. The Baron marveled at Michael's ingenuity, wondering how he had come up with such ideas. Knowledge was the most difficult thing to acquire in this world, especially military knowledge, often guarded as family secrets by powerful noble houses. For a family like theirs, with little inherited wisdom, organized training and provisioning were groundbreaking achievements. The Baron instructed a scribe to observe and document Michael's training methods. This knowledge must be passed down to future generations. After a week of rigorous military training, it was finally time to depart. The Baron climbed the watchtower and surveyed the gathered soldiers. Before him stood 70 trained domain soldiers and 30 conscripted serf soldiers, arranged in orderly rows and columns. Their tense faces betrayed their unease, and their spears pointed toward the sky, gripped tightly in nervous hands. The domain soldiers, hardened by Michael's grueling training, carried large shields and spears tailored to the tactics he had taught them. While the serf soldiers were similarly armed, their equipment and skills were far inferior. The gap between the two groups was undeniable. Like the Baron, the other lords had likely gathered only the minimum number of troops required. With all 5 baronies combined, the force was expected to total around 500 soldiers. The inclusion of Count Charles and other nobles with their retinues should make this number sufficient. The serf soldiers among the recruits were volunteers, motivated by the dream of winning glory and securing freedom for their families. In a world where knowledge was scarce, war remained one of the few accessible paths to social mobility. Among them were a few individuals with unusual backgrounds, captives from the Pamir Empire who had been enslaved after failing to pay their ransom. These individuals now fought on the front lines for a chance at freedom. The domain soldiers, in contrast, were mostly freemen who resided within the castle, receiving regular wages and provisions. Thanks to Michael's rigorous drilling, they now exuded discipline and confidence. There had been no forced conscriptions. Neither freemen, valuable taxpayers, nor serfs, crucial as a labor force, were to be mistreated. These individuals could flee to neighboring territories at any time, making coercion a risky and counterproductive strategy. Nearby, supply officers loaded food and materials onto wagons pulled by pack horses. Since neither Count Woodlock nor Count Charles was likely to compensate for expenses or manpower, it was essential to ensure that the barony gained some profit from this expedition. Chapter 19. Time to play the game. Cutting down the cultists and reclaiming resources from the ravaged territories would require swift action, but they also had to avoid standing out too much, lest they become targets themselves. The delicate balance of interbaronial politics promised a fierce contest of wits. The Baron turned to Michael, his expression grave. News had arrived only yesterday that the cultists had not merely ravaged 2 villages, but had overtaken the entirety of Crowley Barony. "How do you plan to deploy the guards?" the Baron asked. Unlike the regular soldiers, the guards were the military backbone of the domain, trained in swordsmanship and essential to its defense. A significant loss among the guards would deal a critical blow to the barony, whereas the soldiers and serf troops could sustain moderate casualties without jeopardizing its foundation. No matter how poorly defended Crowley Barony might have been, if they overran 2 villages and captured the castle, the enemy won't be easy to defeat, Michael replied. Unfortunately, the late arrival of this information means the soldiers' training is still lacking. To compensate, I've assigned 1 guard for every 10 soldiers, appointing them as unit leaders. Additionally, the supply convoy will include mages and healers for protection, along with 10 guards. That should suffice. Well done, the Baron acknowledged. Then, after a pause, he asked, "What do you make of the fact that we only received this news on the eve of our departure?" The answer was clear to Michael. A faint smirk crossed his face. Whether it's Count Woodlock or Count Charles, someone seems intent on weakening the 5 baronies. Otherwise, this information wouldn't have been so restricted. Given that Count Woodlock has no ties to this land, it's likely Count Charles's handiwork. The Baron felt a swell of pride as he observed his son's sharp judgment. "Exactly," the Baron said. "The cultists have been rebelling for 3 weeks now. Crowley, situated right next to Count Charles's territory, must have sought his aid. That he turned a blind eye to this calamity speaks volumes about his intentions. And now, there are no survivors among Crowley barony's retainers." Michael's eyes glinted with realization. If there are no survivors from the Crowley family, unlike the newer baronies of the 5 domains, the Crowley lineage was famed for its ancient heritage and valuable estates. For Count Charles, who had long coveted the Crowley barony, the cultist rebellion presented an excellent opportunity. It was likely he intended to use the cultists to weaken other nobles and then absorb the barony into his domain. It's possible that the cultists were acting on Count Charles's orders, Michael speculated. "Surely not," the Baron said skeptically. "Could Count Charles be that calculating?" Michael smiled knowingly. The one who benefits most from a disaster is often the perpetrator. It was better to remain cautious and guarded than to be blindsided. "Perhaps," Michael replied. "But for now, we should focus on fortifying our position. Instead of taking unnecessary risks for glory, it's wiser to secure gains from the shadows. If this subjugation weakens the other baronies, it will only benefit us." Their objective was clear: conserve their strength and seize advantages discreetly. It was a strategy that might draw criticism, but in a world where power decided everything, survival equaled strength. There was no need to risk their lives for Crowley barony's wealth or Count Charles's ambitions. "Indeed," the Baron agreed. "It's better to bide our time and emerge victorious in the end." They exchanged smiles, finding mutual satisfaction in their cunning plan. "I'll leave the responsibility of commanding this expedition to you," the Baron said. "I'll support you from behind. Sir Ronald is too focused on brute force to be suitable as a commander." The Baron, who had often worn himself thin managing both command and administration during past expeditions, found this arrangement preferable. With Michael taking the lead, he could now focus on assisting his son. Whether the barony thrived under his rule or Michael's, it would still be a shared legacy. "Yes," Michael replied. "Training the soldiers on the way should improve their quality, even if only slightly." Though he pitied the soldiers who would endure relentless drills during the journey, it was necessary for the barony's survival. Michael also understood that the Baron embodied the archetype of a modern knight, politically astute but militarily inadequate. Here is the translation of the second part of Chapter 11, rewritten in the third-person narrative style. The Crassus family's success rate in war had always been mediocre. Their survival strategy hinged on only charging at knights of comparable rank. By unspoken agreement, knights would bow to one another, assume their stances, and then charge forward with their squire's assistance. Victory was a relief, while defeat merely required a ransom payment for release. Occasionally, an unlucky knight would be trampled by a horse or skewered by a spear, but the Baron had managed to avoid such misfortunes. Sir Ronald, however, was a different case. Known for combining intelligence with strength, he had never lost a duel against knights of a higher rank. Half of the indemnities earned during wartime came from his victories. Michael, however, intended to put an end to this reckless approach to warfare. It wasn't that the people of this world were ignorant. It simply wasn't yet an era of strategy and tactics. Michael knew he couldn't entirely avoid charges. Refusing a duel between knights would brand him a coward and a disgrace to nobility. Even so, he wouldn't be the first to rush into battle for glory. To him, the notions of knightly honor and valor were nothing but nonsense. Michael's plan was simple: follow the lead of those in front. If the unfortunate knight ahead won, so would he. If that knight lost, Michael would simply run a bit faster to avoid the same fate. In this subjugation campaign, he had to prioritize his own survival. This time, the enemy wasn't another noble. In battles between nobles, the loser paid a ransom. Against the cultists, what might be demanded was Michael's head. Having been given a second chance at life, Michael intended to live long and rise in status. Chapter 20. The Crassus family was a minor barony. Alongside the other 4 baronies, they formed a small cluster of influence, a minuscule faction within the broader kingdom. After considering these thoughts, Michael signaled to the messenger. As the signal flag waved, the 100 soldiers and supply unit began their march. Mage Sergei and Healer Hope followed closely behind. The Baron and Michael descended from the watchtower and mounted their horses. On the saddle before Michael sat Niang Niang, his beloved cat. The cat had refused to eat the food prepared by the maids, curling up instead, so Michael had no choice but to bring it along. Fond of the clever and affectionate feline, Michael worried it might starve in his absence. He planned to let the cat roam freely in the camp, which would be safe. After all, if the camp were breached, no one would survive. The journey was grueling. The soldiers endured relentless harassment from their devil trainers, who now numbered 10 per group. Whenever the formation faltered, a trainer would appear seemingly out of nowhere to kick it back into order. Soldiers struggled to keep their provisions from reappearing on the ground, barely managing under the punishing drills. Michael watched with frustration. Though the soldiers had undergone a week of training, they still failed to meet his standards. What had appeared to be a disciplined force at the start of the march devolved over time. Michael realized he had to tighten their discipline before they reached the assembly point. Reluctantly, he adjusted the marching pace, mindful of the soldiers carrying their 3-day emergency rations and full packs. Beating them into submission alone wouldn't suffice. Slowing the pace yielded noticeable improvement in their formation. Though far from perfect, they now resembled a marching army rather than a haphazard mob. Thanks to their standardized uniforms and packs, they looked more cohesive, though Michael suspected that before his reforms, they must have resembled a train of peddlers. The guards, composed mostly of vassal sons, glanced nervously at Michael. Gone were the days when they only needed to worry about their own survival. Having endured 10 times the hardship of the soldiers during training, they couldn't help but tread carefully around Michael. By Michael's standards, the troops were still a ragtag bunch, though better than most other forces. At the very least, they hadn't pillaged villages along their route like locusts, a common practice among poorly disciplined troops. Michael repeatedly emphasized the importance of maintaining formation. Even so, villagers fled in terror at the sight of the approaching soldiers. The extent of past pillaging was evident. Locals treated the soldiers as if they were specters. Villagers knelt and wailed whenever the soldiers stopped to replenish their water supplies. Their emaciated faces and cracked hands tugged at Michael's conscience. During the march, they encountered several wandering warriors, men seeking to earn recognition in battle and ascend to knighthood. Most were distant relatives of noble families, lacking the aptitude to become knights through training alone. These warriors roamed battlefields, hoping to gain experience and awaken their potential. While few achieved the coveted aura awakening, they still clung to their dreams. Through conversations with these warriors, Michael realized something strange. What he considered a tortoise-like march was perceived by the warriors as remarkably fast. Arriving too quickly might leave a strong impression, but it also increased the risk of becoming the first target. Michael further slowed their pace. He ensured the troops marched during daylight and rested late into the morning. In the evenings, they hunted for fresh game, preparing hearty meals with warm soups and portions of meat. Even the serf soldiers received some. The wandering warriors provided Michael with valuable information. The cultists occupying Crowley Barony worshipped an outer god, a terrifying spider goddess said to have the upper body of a beautiful woman and the lower body of a spider. Such a deity would indeed inspire fear. In this world, outer gods were universally reviled. They were said to pierce the material plane, luring humans with cursed whispers, bestowing abilities, and claiming them as followers. The mention of the spider goddess reminded Michael of a certain whispering woman, though he found no records matching her description. He didn't want to dwell on the possibility of her connection to an outer god. It was a daunting thought. When outer gods were confirmed to appear, the Radiant Church would dispatch priests and holy knights. With declining numbers of followers due to corruption among their leadership, the church was desperate for victories. After 10 days, the troops arrived at Kensington Barony, having covered approximately 90 kilometers at a leisurely pace. They were the 4th of the 5 baronies to arrive. Perfect timing. As Michael watched the soldiers set up camp, his squire, Antony, the treasurer's youngest son, approached with a message. "Master Michael, an invitation to a banquet from Baron Kensington has arrived. Baron Aramund has just arrived as the last to join us. The time had come to play the noble's game." Jonathan, the second son of a baker from the Crassus barony, grumbled as he nibbled on his ration of dark bread. Made from a mix of barley and rye, the bread was dry and flavorless. He found himself longing for the meat broth that accompanied their hardtack during the march. The bakery in Kensington Barony must have been incompetent or lacked integrity. The bread even had sand in it, whether from careless milling or deliberate adulteration. Jonathan wondered if the issue lay with the guild overseeing the bakeries or with this particular establishment. As he grumbled with his friend Hans, a rough-looking soldier approached. It was Harry, a frequent debtor to Jonathan's family bakery. "Hey, Jonathan, did you hear the news?" Harry asked. "About Crowley Barony? Those cultist bastards have completely taken over." Jonathan managed to swallow his unpalatable bread before responding. "Last I heard, they'd overrun 2 villages. Now they've taken the whole barony? Isn't that dangerous?" "Dangerous, sure. But think about it. The whole barony. There's plenty to loot," Harry said, his eyes gleaming.